Hey guys, it's Christian, and today I'm going to show you how to manage your network infrastructure like an absolute pro using Netbox. If you're running a HomeLab or any other kind of IT infrastructure, trust me guys, it is the tool that you definitely need to know about. I'm so excited about it because like most of us, in the beginning I also started with simple spreadsheets or using note-taking apps to track my servers, IP addresses, VLANs, or I used drawing apps for visualizing my server rack and network topology. But as my HomeLab infrastructure grew over time, it honestly just became an absolute nightmare to do this manually. So I've recently searched for an application that would help me to track this in a much better and more centralized way. And as most of my projects are defined as declarative config deployments in Git repositories, I also wanted to be able to automate my resource tracking, ideally using my favorite automation tools, Ansible and Terraform. Now, with Netbox, you can do all of this and even more. It is a super powerful IP address and data center infrastructure management platform, or shortly called IPAM and DCIM, where you can track just so many things, from IP addresses and ranges to device types, different manufacturers, VPNs, VLANs, network connectivity. It is absolutely crazy. And if that's even not enough for you, you can extend this application with community plugins, or as I said, use Ansible and Terraform to automate your resource tracking. And the best, Netbox of course has a free community edition that we can easily deploy in our HomeLab. So let's do this together. I hope you will like it. But before we continue with network management and documentation, let's quickly talk about how to actually secure our network infrastructure. And to do that, you sometimes need to think like an attacker and practice some of the attack patterns your network might be vulnerable to. That's why I'd like to show you the sponsor of today's video, TryHackMe, the world's largest hands-on real-world cybersecurity training platform with over 6 million users. And what I love about this, everything runs directly in your browser. So no setup, no virtual machines to configure, no production setups you could damage, just instant access to real hacking environments. Let me show you. So here I'm jumping into their offensive security room right now. It starts with a beginner-friendly challenge, hacking into a fake bank web application. And here's the thing, yeah, so these labs simulate real-world conditions that you can reset at any time. So you're really encouraged to experiment and even break things as you're learning. Watch this. So here I'm running directory B on the fake banking website. This command brute forces the website to discover hidden pages. And just look at that. We found /images, which is just pictures, so nothing interested. But there's also a /bank deposit. So that's a secret endpoint. This page lets you add money to bank accounts. But I'm gonna leave you hanging there. You probably have to try out yourself what happens next. Of course, it is just a very simple test, but it still explains some of the fundamental techniques cyber criminals use to break into real systems. And it certainly helps you as a network admin to defend yourself against this if you understand what's going on. And by the way, it's also a lot of fun. So jump into TryHackMe with a link in the description. Start with the offensive security room and see how far you can get. Many rooms are, by the way, completely free to play, and with my code Christian25 you get 25% off the annual plan if you want full access. Okay guys, so let's get back to Netbox, and first of all, we need to install this thing on our HomeLab environment, of course. Here, by the way, this is the website netboxlabs.com. I will put you that in the description. So this is the official website of the Netbox application where you get more information about this app, and you can also find links to the enterprise versions that they offer, but also to the free community edition and the project you find on GitHub. There's also a link to the documentation. Just make sure that you select Netbox Community. So here you get more installation tutorials, getting started guides, and more information about customizations, about the different integrations and plugins that you can use. So this is definitely a great source of information that you should take a closer look at. Now, if you go to the installation guide, you might directly notice that this is kind of a more complex environment where you need to set up a few different things to make this work. Like, a Netbox is mostly written in Python, but it also requires a Postgres database and a Redis database for the caching. And there are also other tutorials about setting up an HTTP server that allows you to obtain SSL certificates for your Netbox platform. Now, you can of course go through all of this stuff, install this on a Linux server directly. I've also found a community project around it. Of course, I will also put you that in the description links. And this is a community-made Docker image of the Netbox server and worker. And you can easily find some examples for Docker Compose deployments to spin up a new Netbox instance and connect this to a Redis and Postgres database container. And then you could use this in combination with something like Travis traffic, the free and open source reverse proxy that I'm using to obtain trusted TLS certificates from Let's Encrypt. You hopefully have all watched my traffic tutorial. If not, we'll also put this in the description. But if you want to get started with a super simple and easy template that contains all of the important settings, as well as the traffic labels and configuration settings for email notifications and everything important, you should also take a look at my Boilerplates GitHub repository. So this is a free template collection library, and I've also created a small CLI tool that you can use to spin up a new Netbox Docker Compose stack in just a few minutes that contains everything you need for a production-ready setup. So you don't need anything else, you just need this repository. Copy this one simple command to install the Boilerplate CLI tool in your terminal. When you're watching this video right now, there should also be a new version of the Boilerplate CLI tool released, the version 0.10. If you're watching this video a bit later, there also might be different versions, but this contains a more comprehensive list of all of my templates that I'm currently maintaining. Here you also find the traffic reverse proxy, and then use this in combination with the Netbox Docker Compose template. Let's first of all take a closer look at this template, what it all contains. The .env file that contains all these secrets, so that you should definitely secure properly, and the compose.yaml file that contains the compose stack for Docker to deploy. You can also set up a few variables that will enable or disable certain settings in the Compose template. So for example, if you want to enable traffic labels, you can easily just customize these values here with your preferred settings, like the traffic network. This automatically connects this to an external Docker network where your traffic reverse proxy should be running. And in the new version of the Boilerplate 0.10, I've also split the traffic host into two variables. The traffic domain, so this you can pre-configure with default variables to your local DNS zone that you're using in the HomeLab. In my case, this is home.cl.creator.de. And the traffic host will be the subdomain. And you can also enable the traffic TLS. So this will automatically obtain a new trusted TLS certificate for the host and the domain using your certificate resolver that you have configured. And you can also enable email settings. So here you can add an email host, port, username, password, and an encryption. So this will be star TLS or SSL, depending on what you are preferring. This will automatically enable the environment variables to set up proper email notification in Netbox. Also pretty useful. And you can also choose if you want to connect this to an external database. So then the Docker Compose stack will skip the Postgres container. Let's just do this together. By the way, the new version of the Boilerplates CLI tool also contains a few other settings here. For example, we can set the -n for non-interactive mode. Otherwise, it will ask you to go through all the variables so you can change them in the CLI. But if you're using a simple -n, it will skip the customization. It will just deploy it with all the variables that you define here. And you can also now use -o to output this to a specific directory. For example, I will just say temp netbox demo, for example. And then we can also use the -v parameter to set some specific variables. For example, if you want to enable traffic, just set this to true. Traffic host, I want to set to netbox server test 1. And I also want to enable email notifications. Set this to true. Of course, you also need to customize then the email variables. Here you can also use environment variables if you export them first. So I'm using this so that you don't see my real email secret values, of course. And then hit enter. So this will automatically generate the template. Here you can also see the variables that you have enabled. Currently, I've disabled the metrics. By the way, the Netbox secret key, this is also something that you would have to generate manually. If you don't set a value here, it will automatically generate a 50 characters long secret key that Netbox requires and put this in the .env file in the directory that you have used to export this template to. And as I can see, it here skipped the port exposure because we have enabled traffic, the reverse proxy, so we don't need to access the unsecured web interface 8000 port exposure. If you are not using TLS certificates and you want insecure connections, then you can skip the traffic labels and you can just open the web interface on the server name using the port 8000. All right, so let's go to my Netbox demo environment. Let's take a look at the files that have been generated. You can see it has created a simple Netbox container with the latest version that I've updated to my template library. If you're using a reverse proxy, you also have to set this allowed host variable. I've automatically done this using the traffic host and domain part. Here are the settings for the database. The time zone is also kind of important. And the Redis connection, the secret key that is in the .env variable, and of course the email configuration, the proxy network for traffic, a secure backend network for the database connection, the volumes, the traffic labels as you have specified in the variables, and the same for the separate worker process. And here you'll find the small Redis container, the Redis cache container, and the Postgres database for the backend. And here are the networks defined, the volumes. So this is everything that we need. With my boilerplate CLI tool, everything should work automatically. We don't have to specify anything else. So we can just connect to my server test 1. I just want to check if there are any containers running. So you can see I've already pre-deployed the traffic reverse proxy. So that should be running. And we can just start the container in the background. So this will pull down the latest version of the container images, start everything. And it takes a few minutes until the server is fully provisioned, because it first of all needs to initialize the database with some values. You can, by the way, monitor this progress if you just use Docker Compose logs. Don't be worried if you're seeing a lot of error messages here. That is because when the worker and server processes start before the database has actually been provisioned, it will stop and fail. But don't worry, it will retry to start up again in a few minutes. So just wait until everything is complete. The process is complete when you see that message in the logs here. Unit configuration loaded successfully. Netbox has been started. All right, so now we can open a new browser window and just open netbox.servertest1.home.clcreative.de, and you can now log into the web interface with the default admin user, and password is also admin. So don't worry if some of the pages are operating a bit slow. I think that is based on the Python code, so this is actually not the most efficient one. So when you first click on any of the site, it might load for 1 or a few seconds, but the second connection should be much faster, and then you can navigate through all of the menus. Now, one thing before I start showing you around and explain how to work with this system and what you can all track here, I want to mention one thing that is super important. So here you see a warning message in the logs. It says you have the old default admin API token in your code base. The token is widely known, and please remove it. So I don't actually know why the heck they don't do this by default, because it is a super insecure practice. But anyways, first of all, go to the admin settings, go to users, and there you can customize your admin user. So you can change the password. That is also definitely something that you should do. And then go to API tokens. So here you can see there's a default API token 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on for the admin user with write access enabled and no permissions and no allowed IP addresses. So I don't know why the heck they're doing this. You can just use the API with this default token to access everything and just change the entire configuration. So this is super dangerous if you don't change this. For demo purposes, I will just leave it by default, but in a production environment, please remove this, yeah, or set this to a secure value. All right, so that's it. And also, because we have enabled the email labels, of course, I also want to test if the email notifications are working. So there is a nice documentation page somewhere in the official documentation here. So that explains how you can easily test this. These are the environment variables, again, pre-configured in the boilerplates. But here you can use a small Python script to send a simple test notification. So all you have to do is just execute docker compose exec/interactive terminal on the Netbox container and open the bash. So this will open a shell where you can just paste the command to open the Python script. And here you now just need to copy and paste these commands here. So first of all, import the Django core mail library send mail, and then send a mail from the email address that you have used in your from environments to any email address of your choice. Execute this, and if you see an error here, might indicate there's something wrong with your credentials. If you see a 1, that means the test email has been sent, and you should see a small test notification like this here. So this way you can confirm that's working. All right, perfect. So then you can just exit the Python console and the container shell as well. And let's go back to the Netbox environment and let me just show you around what you can all do here. So if you just explore the different sections in the menu, you can set up things like organization settings. Tenants is probably super important for any larger organization that manages tenant clients or building IT documentation for your customers or what else. You can also manage contacts here. You can manage server racks, rack types. You can manage the different regions and the sites, so where devices and things are located. You can manage devices, of course, platforms. You can even manage entire cases or components of devices. So every network card, every GPU, every CPU or mainboard memory, you can manage as a separate parts here. So you can see there is so much you can track, and it might be a bit overwhelming if you're just starting out and you don't really know what you should use. Also, what is sometimes a bit annoying, that if you want to create a new device, for example, you can't do this because first of all, you need to create a site. Then you need to create a device type and a device role that you need to assign. So there are many dependencies between these different items. But don't worry, let me just walk you through step by step through a minimal configuration that you can later expand according to your needs. So if you're using this to document a small home lab, you can just use a few different components. You probably don't need to track tenants or so. But if you're using this in a large IT organization or an IT service organization, you can track almost everything that is important to your or to your customer's environment. So that's really cool. All right, so first of all, you need to set up a site. So a site is the main organization item or entity that you need to create. It is a physical location, can be office, a data center, or a home lab. So I will just add a new one that I'm calling home lab. Yeah. The slug is, by the way, the URL-friendly unique shorthand name. So that typically uses no spaces, no special characters, only lower cases. And here you can also add any other things like regions. You can add groups in here, facilities, ASN time zone description, tenant group, physical address, shipping address. Yeah, again, it is designed for larger organizations as well. But if you just fill out the required fields, it should also be enough. Let's just create the new HomeLab site. And then let's first of all close this organization and go to server racks. So this again is also super cool. In the past, I've created some visual diagrams using Excalidraw, but here you can track different server racks in your environment or customer's environment. Here you can see if I wouldn't have created a site, I wouldn't been able to create a server rack before. So select the site, and then I'm just calling this HomeLab server rack. Yeah, of course, it is active. You can also set up specific statuses if this is planned or deprecated, reserved for future expansions or what else. You can also create rack roles, rack types, but honestly, I just have a single server rack in my home, and I think that's even more than enough. But typically, you could fill in airflows, facility IDs, and whatnot, yeah. This might be important here, the width. Usually, you can switch between small 10-inch, smaller HomeLab racks or standard 19 inches, yeah. I think the other I've not seen anywhere. And you can also set the starting units and the height unit. So I think in my example, I have 24 units in my server rack. And in this page, you can even see here a diagram of your server rack. So if you add devices, you can later choose on which unit they are located, and that is pretty cool. So then you don't need to use any other third-party tools. You can automatically attach a device to the right location, and of course you can later choose how much units a device consumes. So that is really cool, and you can even manage the front and the rear. This is super practical. All right, so now let's add a device to this server rack. So first of all, we need to go to devices. I will close the racks here. And before we can do anything with devices, we need to create a device role. So a device role basically defines the job that it does. You can also later create device types, which are more about the hardware, what it is. The device roles are really things like, for example, a router. There you can choose a specific color for that. By the way, you can select or deselect this here, VM role. So that defines if a virtual machine can be attached to this role. And maybe I should go back to the device roles because I've accidentally added the switch a VM role. So I think that's not actually correct because it doesn't really make a lot of sense here. But typically, you could create a virtual firewall or a virtual router if you want. Yeah. A virtual hypervisor doesn't actually make sense. So maybe we just remove that here as well. Just add more stuff if you want, like firewalls or, yeah, I don't know, printers, for example. You could also manage printers here. Then I also want to create a device type. So first of all, I need to create a manufacturer. Sometimes they have smart selection boxes in their menus, like a manufacturer. I haven't created this. Originally, I would have to go back to a different menu first. But sometimes you see a plus icon here. So that means you can directly create a manufacturer here. Now here you track things like HP, Dell, or whatever. Minis Forum, for example, if you have mini PCs. Yeah, that's also good. I usually track a DIY if I have devices that I completely built myself, yeah, with main boards, different cases, and so forth. And yeah, let's, for example, choose DIY. The model is, for example, let's create 2-unit DIY rack server model. So this is a very generic thing, but I use this for my Proxmox server, for example. So here, this is a 2-unit device. So I switch the height to 2 units. Exclude from utilization. No, it's full depth. Yeah, it kind of is, yeah. But I think that's enough. So let's create this device type. All right. And now we can start creating a new device. Okay, so I'm going to start with Proxmox Production 1. This is the one Proxmox server that I have. It is a hypervisor, of course. And it is a 2-unit DIY rack server. Now here I also need to select the site. And what you can also do now, it is optional, but if you use this for rack server management, you can also select the server rack, that it is on the front or on the rear, and which position it is. So I'm just going to pick, I don't really know what position it is in my real HomeLab environment, but just pick U16 probably. Yeah, status is active. Let's create this. And now if we go back to racks, you can see in the HomeLab server rack that this is now filled in with the Proxmox Production 1. So if you add more devices, you have a really good plan of your HomeLab server rack. Of course, it is a lot of work to track all these things, but don't worry, we will talk about automation in a few minutes here, yeah? Just want to continue showing you around with some other stuff that might be useful. For example, virtualization. You can add virtual machines. These are not really devices because devices are physical things and virtual machines are virtual things, as the name already suggests, yeah? And first of all, we have to add a cluster. Before we can do that, we have to add a cluster type. So yeah, again, we need to go through this process here, yeah? But once you have set up your original, like the roles, the colors and things, the other stuff is much easier, yeah? Okay, so let's just create Proxmox cluster. You can use a different slug if you want here. Proxmox, for example. Yeah, I think that's fine. And now go to clusters. I will call this Proxmox cluster production 1. Of course, it's a Proxmox cluster. Status is active. Yeah, that's all. Let's create this. And now we can add virtual machines. By the way, what you can also do, you can attach devices to this cluster. So, for example, if you go in here and you manage your physical machines, this is Proxmox Production 1 that we've just enabled. Let's click on Edit and let's attach this to the, where is it? Here, the Proxmox Cluster Production 1. So then this physical device is attached to this virtual cluster, and we can later also say that we want to place the actual virtual machines on that specific device as part of the cluster. So let's go to virtualization again, virtual machines, and let's create a new virtual machine. I want to call this server production 1, for example. Yeah, the status is active. This is a role server. The cluster we can choose here, and this is specifically created on the Proxmox Production 1 hypervisor. You can also select a primary IPv4 or IPv6, but you cannot type in anything in here because, as you might have already guessed it, you need to first of all create this IP address as a separate object. But anyway, we will do this in a minute. So let's first of all create this virtual machine. As you can see here, you can even create components components for this, like interfaces. You can also add resources like virtual CPUs, memories, disk space, configuration context, and whatnot. So this is really a super powerful platform. So sometimes it might be a bit overwhelming again, but don't worry about it. You don't have to use all these features. So just use what actually is important to you and to your documentation, what you want to keep track of. And things that might frequently change, you probably don't have to fill in. Yeah. One thing that is also super useful, and of course, this is also one of the main reasons why I definitely wanted to set up Netbox for my HomeLab, is IP address management, so IPAM. This is also something that I previously just have written down somewhere. You could also add some more complex environments like ASNs, aggregations, VRFS. You, of course, don't have to use this in a HomeLab. But something that might be useful is VLANs, yeah, to keep track of this, and certainly IP addresses, the most important thing here. So you just can add a new IP address, just type it in 2002, for example. Or let's start with 4. By the way, you also need to add a mask, so 24 for a 24 subnet mask, or /16. That's what I'm personally using in my HomeLab, depending on how complex you want your network to be. And then you can assign this to a virtual machine. So you will see no results here, because we first of all need to create an interface. So yeah, that's something we need to go back. Let's do this for my devices first. So let's go to interfaces and let's add a new interface on the Proxmox production 1. I just want to call this ETH0. So this is just the super simple integrated network interface on the motherboard of the Proxmox server. And then I can go to IP address management and create a new IP address for this 10.20.04/16 and attach this to the device Proxmox production 1. Of course, I also want to make this the primary IP address of the device, and let's click on create. And then when you go back to IP addresses, you can see this one is currently reserved. It's assigned to a machine. And when you go to devices, you can also see the IP address of the device in this table here. So I think this is super practical. Let me quickly switch to my Netbox production instance, because I just want to show you how that looks like in my real environment. So let us go to devices. So here you see all the physical devices that I've added, my firewall, my NAS, my 2 Proxmox servers, and my switch, all with IP addresses. But of course, I've also added many virtual machines here, everything that I've deployed on my Proxmox production cluster here, with the CPUs, the IP address. And the more devices you have, the more complex this, of course, becomes. Sometimes I'm also switching or changing things around, like changing IP addresses, creating new virtual machines for testing, deleting old virtual machines, and stuff like that. In the past, I have written down all of this in a simple note-taking system. I was using Notion for this in a simple table, but I've not always updated this when I deployed a new server or changed something. You always have to remember, when you do something, you have to go to your documentation and change it and so on. No, I want to show you one method that I've just recently applied to my system, and this is super, super cool. Let me just show you the Proxmox project that I am managing. So here, I'm managing all of my virtual machines as Terraform files. I've, in the past, made a video tutorial on how to do this, but that basically allows me to create resources in a declarative way, where I define all of my servers here in this file. And when I make updates to this Terraform project, it starts creating the new virtual machines based on what is in this file. And if I change the memory or I change the CPU cores and apply the changes, it will also automatically change or make the changes through the Proxmox API. And what is super cool, Netbox has a Terraform provider as well. You will find this project here. This is owned by Bräuniger, so this is no official provider, but I've tested this and it seems to work pretty well with at least this supported Netbox version. And of course, if you see any errors here, or if I see any things, I will also make some pull requests to this repository for sure. It's super cool. You can also find this on the official Terraform registry. So here's the link to Bräuniger Netbox. And here you can see the files to use this provider. So here, for example, in my main Terraform project, where I'm managing the Proxmox devices, I'm managing the DNS records as well, and my authentic resources. I've also added the Netbox provider here with all the configurations and secret variables and so on. And then I can start managing the virtual machines. And you can see that I'm not managing like the virtual CPUs as a raw value in here. This is actually a reference to the Proxmox device. And the same is also true for the IP address. So that means when I create a new Proxmox VM and I copy this template, I can also copy all the other templates, and the values that are documented on my Netbox instance are basically just references to the actual source of truth, which is in Terraform. So when I change the virtual CPUs in here and I update the resource, this automatically updates the CPUs on my Netbox instance as well. And the same is for IP addresses, for names, for everything. It's super, super comfortable. So then you don't have to manually document everything yourself. You can basically connect all your different Terraform resources together. So this is super, super cool. And what I also want to show you, by the way, it is not complete, but I've just updated the boilerplates to support Terraform as well. So here I started to collect some boilerplates for Netbox virtual machine, for example. So when I show you this is a boilerplate to create the Terraform templates for managing VMs in Netbox. It doesn't have references to all the objects in Proxmox, of course, but you can still enable IP address management, for example, enable IPAM, enter a primary IPv4, enter a DNS name, and it will then generate the Terraform files with all the values, so you can easily automate your resource creation. Let me demonstrate how this works. So I will go back to our demo project where we have the compose file. Let me create a new directory called Terraform and cd into that. So here we can start creating the files. First of all, we have to create the provider.tf, which you can basically just copy from the documentation here. And yeah, so here you need to add your configuration options. Just go to documentation and then scroll down. So here's an example usage. You just need the server URL and the API token. So in my case, when we go back to my test environment, let's just grab the URL in here and the API key. That's why I haven't changed it in the beginning. So then I can just copy the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on API token in here. And that's basically everything. Now we can start adding our Terraform files. But again, because I'm lazy, I will use the boilerplates templates to do that for me. So let us go in here and let's generate a new Netbox VM. Here, I've already tested this before. So I will output this to the Netbox demo Terraform project. So no, this is actually a bit unfortunate here. I will find out how I can fix this in a future version, but currently it just overwrites this file here if it exists in the directory. So you just create the template, then change the file name. So that should help. The resource name will be virtual machine test 1. So that will be the object name, the VM name. So this is the virtual machine name later in Netbox. The cluster reference. So this is important. Every time you see an underscore ref means it is a reference to an existing object. So make sure if you're using this boilerplate that this cluster is actually existing before, otherwise it will not find it. But if we go in here, virtualization clusters, should see Proxmox cluster production 1 should be existing in here. The same for site reference. So the site HomeLab should exist before creating this resource. And then enable IPAM, enable primary IPv4. Don't forget to add the /16 subnet mask and a DNS name. However, these things, as you might see here, I can't see it right now, but these things are optional, right? So you don't have to use them, but you can use them. All right, so let's just hit enter. This will generate the boilerplate, and let's go back to the file. You can see the file was generated, and this is a template that is automatically created according to the variables that we've used in the boilerplates command, but here it has created the interface object, it has created the IP address object and attached it as the primary IP address to this device. Here's the resource for the virtual machine, and it queries the resources for the cluster and the site. So now, one thing, we just have to go in here and say tofu or Terraform init, depending on what tool you're using for Terraform automation. So this installs the Bräuninger Netbox provider. And then when I now execute tofu plan, you can see what resources would be created here. Let's just do an apply auto approve. So then it's automatically creating the resources. And if we go back and go to virtualization, virtual machines, here's our VM test 1. But actually, I think I might just extend this template here with a role name that might be optional. So then you could add a role reference in here as well. I will later take a closer look at the templates, and I might add a few other settings here. And maybe I also expand the boilerplates list for more Netbox options as well, if you like. Of course, feel free to create your resource files as well if you're using Proxmox to automate things, or you want to document resources that you're already managing in Terraform. Remove the hard-coded values and just add a reference to something. I will think more closely about how we can interconnect these different references to other objects in the boilerplates. I'm not really sure how to actually solve this, but just see this as a starting point where you can copy and paste some of this information and just use this for your own automation deployments. Anyway, I think Netbox is a super powerful platform that makes IT documentation and especially network management so much easier and so much more professional. I hope you like this, and now you can tell me in the comments, what do you think about Netbox? Will you use this to document your HomeLab or IT infrastructure? And yeah, if you have any suggestions for boilerplates templates, check out the GitHub repository, create an issue or create a pull request if you want to contribute to this community project. But yeah, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that was interesting and helpful to you. Thanks to all the members and supporters of my channel. You guys are so amazing. You make all these community projects and the videos possible. And of course, I'm going to catch you in the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.